Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are warned that the following program contains images and voices of deceased persons.
In August 1966, a group of Gurindji people who were working on the Wave Hill Pastoral Station went on strike.
They walked off the job over a month ago.
The message that they were sending out to the world was that not only are we going to strike for better wages and conditions and no longer work for flour, tea and bully beef, but we're also going to sit down and go on strike for our land rights.
Of Aborigine claims that on some stations they live like dogs in huts they have to crawl into.
The Wave Hill walkout was all done in the glare of publicity. I mean, it was happening up there in remote part of Australia, but everyone knew about it. And there were Aboriginal leaders who were very, very persuasive.
Well, what was before the bestie born and I born? That was a blackfellow country.
It was no longer possible to simply treat your Aboriginal workers as though they were just one remove above the stock. And by the 1960s, given that the whole world was becoming decolonised, the whole world was acutely aware of racial discrimination, Australia simply couldn't afford to have this sort of issue being looked at, read about, seen by people all around the world.
You think you get all the Aborigines on your side?
Yes,
In all the Northern Territory?
that's right.
So I think that there is a clear acceptance within the collective Australian psyche that Aboriginal people have an entitlement to this country.
In my perspective, I've always looked at Waveville as being the turning point. I think Vincent Lingari and the men that were with him are heroes in anyone's criteria. The things that they stood for, the things that they believed in. If people know their story, they would accept them for who they were. They were very courageous men.
Since the white man has used every means and used just about every justification to back up what means he has used in dispossessing Aboriginal people of their land, it seems to me that now there's time is coming when Aboriginal people themselves, or will come, when they themselves will take justification and means to control their own future in the form of ownership of land.
In '72, the Aboriginal Embassy happened after William McMahon, as the Prime Minister of Australia, read out his Australia Day speech saying that he would not recognise land rights for the Gurindjis of the Northern Territory.
The Tent Embassy was one of the most overt and in-your-face acts of resistance in the nation's capital, without seeking permission from anybody.
The idea to call it an embassy itself was a piece of great, clever public relations, because very quickly it became the focal point for the whole issue of Indigenous rights in Australia.
That was one event amongst many that no doubt influenced the thinking of the legislators of the time. And if you jump ahead 5 years, it was on Australia Day 1977, exactly 5 years to the day of the Tent Embassy, when the Aboriginal Land Rights Act in the Northern Territory commenced to operate.
We will legislate to give Aborigines land rights.
In the 1972 federal election, Mr Whitlam for the Labor Party promised that if elected, his government would ensure that Aboriginal land rights laws were enacted. The government was elected, and one of his first actions as Prime Minister was to commission Mr Justice Woodward to conduct an inquiry not into whether land rights laws should be passed, but how those land rights laws should look what should be covered by them.
All of us as Australians are diminished, while the Aborigines are denied their rightful place in this nation.
The old era of the empire and European dominance had come to an end. He knew that one of the great liabilities Australia had was that it appeared, like South Africa, to be a white racist society.
The land, formerly owned by Lord Vestey's British group of companies, is near the middle of the Northern Territory, and Wattie Creek itself...
In 1975, the Wave Hill pastoral lease was purchased by the Aboriginal Land Fund Commission, and Prime Minister Whitlam handed over the lease to the Gurindji people, and there are very famous photographs of the Prime Minister pouring the soil into the hand of the old leader of the group, Vincent Lingiari.
I think it was something that just hit me like a bombshell. I always grew up on a small mission, on a small country town, and your world vision tended to reflect that. All of a sudden you have Aboriginal men standing up and say, I am who I am. I'm an Aboriginal man, I live under my law, I live in accordance with my culture, and I'm proud of that. And I have the right to live like that.
That's where the issue of sovereignty emerged very soon after 1972. That is the question of not just whose land, but whose law. Whose law is it that we are subject to?
The Wailbri people and the Tanami are definitely on the move. Helped by sympathetic outsiders, they have crystallised their yearnings for land rights into a concerted legal challenge.
The Land Rights Act for the Northern Territory was very much an initiative of the Whitlam government following the Woodward Commission.
The native title only recognises rights and interests in land, and people don't get freehold title or a leasehold or any title. The Northern Territory, they get title to the land. The other important feature of the Northern Territory Aboriginal Land Rights Act is that they had an effective right of veto in respect of mining on their land.
The game had changed and opened up so that we, for the first time, now had a place to play in that game. We were no longer excluded from the game. And that was a major, major, major change.
The protests of the 70s and 80s about land rights were clearly an assertion of sovereignty. In other words, the government can't give us anything, they've got to return to us what has always been ours. And of course there was a lot of argument about what those land rights laws should contain.
Ayers Rock, or Uluru, and the land around it is given back to the traditional Aboriginal owners. And they greet the occasion with a ceremony that is abstract, mystical, but most of all, happy.